Good evening. I'd like to welcome everyone to our March 10th, 2015 meeting of the City of Everett Planning Commission. And we will start out with a roll call.
Chair Stewart.
Here.
Commissioner Sosin.
Here.
Commissioner Sand.
Here.
Commissioner Adams.
Here.
Commissioner Jordison.
Here.
Commissioner Tisdall.
Here.
And now we have reports from Planning Commission members. Start down at the end with Commissioner
Nothing to
Tisdall.
report.
No report.
No report.
No report.
Neither do I. And I don't have anything for the good of the order tonight either. Are there some preliminary staff comments?
Alan Giffen, Planning Director. Just a reminder that we will have a Planning Commission workshop next week, the 17th, on the recreational marijuana land use regulations. And so that's the only item of business for next week's agenda.
Okay. And next, we have an opportunity for citizen comments. We do have 3 items on our agenda this evening, and the agenda's over there on the table. So we also, though, prior to beginning those public hearings and public workshop, there is an opportunity for anyone who would like to step up to the podium and make some comment to do so. And we do have these half sheets that I'd appreciate people filling out that will help us make sure we've got your name in the record as an interested party. So the first sheet that I have is Dave Ramstad.
Could this gentleman go ahead? He's a little older than me and he's about...
Certainly. Certainly. And if you wouldn't mind stating your name and address for the record.
Jack O'Donnell, 3329 Grand Avenue. And I'd like to just to read a passage from the latest Everett Tribune as it relates to the contention between the city and the county and the parking issue over the new courthouse. Everett's idea for Hewitt, and I'm just reading a small part here. Everett is pushing for a different idea altogether. It is pitching that the county accept a plan where the city tears down an entire block of Hewitt Avenue between Rockefeller and Oaks Avenue to build a new multi-purpose building. In the city's plan, per a recent city memo, the county would rent 300 plus parking spaces. For Everett, rebuilding the block just west of Xfinity would be a win-win. The block includes a vacant lot where the McCrossin building sat, and the shuttered hulk of the Hodges building is on the other end of the block, where a 2013 fire forced residents out. Well, the city gave out a 2014 loan to the smoke-damaged Hermes building on the block to rebuild itself. That is not an issue. City spokeswoman Megan Pembroke said, "Win-win, no. This is right in the heart of the Hewitt Avenue National Register Historic District. This is the very core of the district. The hulk of the Hodges building, yes, it's had a fire, but this 1923 building built by Everett architect Benjamin F. Turnbull is a very important building on Hewitt Avenue. And if we're thinking about it being condemned and so on, we need to remember that the Monte Cristo Hotel sat about 20 years in downtown Everett, completely vacant. So we can look to the Monte Cristo today, or we could look at the Commerce Building. Both of them are on the National Register of Historic Places, because the Commerce Building and the Hodges Building face off each other at 1801 and 1802 Hewitt Avenue, and they're like salt and pepper shakers. To lose the Hodges Building would be a travesty. And I know that you'll be visiting this article, as it comes up. Thank you.
All right. Next, Dave Ramstad.
Dave Ramstad, 1301 Pinkerton Avenue in South Everett. I want to underline everything Mr. O'Donnell has just said. I want to convey to you that there's shock and dismay coming up out of our neighborhoods, particularly out of the 98201, as the word gets around that no sooner has the city dedicated its National Historic District than the most important intersection of that district is now slated to be torn down for a commercial strip. This just can't be allowed to happen. We have been hearing within the last year of the growing numbers of population coming here. We hear of populations in Everett of 140, 160,000, say in the next 2 decades. We see that all through our Great Recession, there was construction in the city of Everett for living spaces for people of all kinds who find Everett a charming and wonderful working class, real authentic city, mixing culture, art, beauty, nature, and work. We don't know why any building, no matter what its condition, that could be housing, would even be considered to be a tear down when population is coming to our central city. So I just want to say, I just want to convey that there's concern out in the community, and we'll be talking to the council on the matter, and whatever piece of the matter you may come into handling or confronting or dealing with before in future, I just want you to be aware of the sensitivity of that area. Thank you.
Any other citizen comments? Seeing none, we will move to our item number 1, which is a public hearing related to a code amendment of the Everett Municipal Code, Section 18.28.305, which addresses encroachments and gaps in land division applications. Mr. Giffen?
Thank you. Alan Giffen, Planning Director. This code amendment was initiated by the Planning Commission at the request of Mr. Steve Williams. Mr. Williams has a property that is impacted by a number of encroachments, and he would like to clear up a few of those with 2 of his neighbors. Unfortunately, the way our code is written, it would require him to also resolve some encroachments that affect other neighbors that are, at this point, not in agreement with a proposal to resolve the encroachment on other portions of his property. In order for us to be able to make some simple administrative decisions, our code needs to be revised that gives us a little more flexibility with regard to boundary line adjustments. I've given you in your packet that you had a workshop on a month ago, and in tonight's packet, an example. This is not Mr. Williams' property in the example, but it is something that is fairly common, especially in a community with lots and buildings and fences and improvements and outbuildings and additions that have been in place for many years. They're often placed in locations that don't conform with setback requirements, and in some cases either encroach over a property line, or in the case of a fence, may be inside of a property line by as many as a few feet and not in the right location. And so usually the boundary line adjustment is a good tool to use to fix those kinds of problems. And so we wanted to eliminate some of the verbiage in that section on encroachments and gaps. First of all, making it so that it does not apply to boundary line adjustments. For subdivisions, we would keep that language in place so that if there is an encroachment on a property that is being subdivided to create additional lots, that those encroachments and gaps would be resolved. For a boundary line adjustment, it's not creating any additional lots. It is just shifting the location of a boundary between 2 or more properties. And so we've talked about this in the past. Tonight's a public hearing, and you have a resolution in your packet that, should you choose to adopt it, would recommend that the City Council make the amendment that is highlighted in the exhibit. Actually, it's in the first and second page of the staff memo. The resolution is on the fourth and fifth pages. So with that, I conclude my presentation.
Okay, thank you. And then I did note also that there's an Exhibit A after the resolution. I'm wondering, okay. And then in reviewing the resolution, keep in mind that the Planning Commission has 3 findings we need to make. The first is that this proposed amendment is consistent with the Everett Growth Management Comprehensive Plan. Secondly, we need to find that the proposed amendment bears a substantial relation to the public health, safety, and welfare. And thirdly, that the proposed amendment promotes the best long-term interests of the Everett community. So, Planning Commissioners, do you have any questions of staff? I don't think we have any questions. We did have the workshop earlier, and I think several of us had asked questions then. Do we need a motion to open the public hearing?
No, you can open the public hearing, you just need a
Okay.
motion to close it.
Okay. So, Commissioners, I guess we'll move into hearing from the public if anybody has any questions or comments you'd like to make on this item. Seeing none, do I hear a motion to close the public hearing?
So move.
Second.
And we'll take a vote then.
Commissioner Tisdale,
Yes.
Commissioner Jordison,
Yes.
Commissioner Adams,
Yes.
Commissioner Sand,
Yes.
Commissioner Sosin,
Yes.
Chair Stewart.
Yes. And now, the Planning Commission will turn our attention to the proposed resolution. Do I hear a motion to approve the resolution?
I have a question first.
Do you have a question? Yes. Commissioner Sand.
Ellen, should since the Plan Commission initiated the action to start the process for this code amendment, should that be reflected in the actual resolution? I see it talks about a request was made for the amendment, but there wasn't a recognition that the Planning Commission initiated it.
That's a good question, and I think that would be a good addition as a 4th recital under the whereas section that would read something to the effect that whereas the Planning Commission agreed to initiate the requested code amendment or initiate consideration of the requested code amendment. So if it pleases the commission, we can add that line into the the recitals, and then we just, if you pass the motion, then we would give you, the chairperson, that amended or revised resolution for signature.
Any other questions or comments? So do I hear a motion to approve this resolution with the amended, whereas number 4, that the Planning Commission agreed to initiate consideration of a code amendment?
I would move to approve as amended. Motion to approve, excuse me.
I'll second.
Commissioner Tisdale,
Yes.
Commissioner Jordison,
Yes.
Commissioner Adams.
Yes.
Commissioner Sand,
Yes.
Commissioner Sosin,
Yes.
Chair Stewart.
Yes.
If I could add one thing, Chairperson
Yes.
Stewart, this will now move on to the City Council probably in about 4 to 6 weeks.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next is item number 2, which is a public hearing to amend ordinance number 3380-14 as proposed to be amended, approving a change in the location of student housing for Trinity Lutheran College, abbreviated TLC, to the west side of the 2600 block of Rockefeller Avenue with the required off-street parking in an off-site location. And I note that we did receive a revised resolution, I believe, on our desks. when
Yes,
we-
and I'll explain that. Thank you, Alan Giffen, Planning Director. When I was reviewing my packet prior to the meeting, realized that the draft resolution that I had included in your packet earlier did not include a statement saying what you would resolve. And so if you look on the item, second page of the handout that I put on your desk tonight, I've highlighted a section that says, "Now therefore be it resolved that the Planning Commission recommends that the City Council approve an amendment to ordinance number 3380-14 as amended by ordinance number 3440-14, as indicated in Exhibit 1, which is attached here to and incorporated herein by reference. So apologize for the omission in the earlier draft of the resolution. Wanted to make sure that you had a resolution that actually made sense. So
Okay.
with that, I can go into my presentation, which is pretty brief. We did have a workshop on this a month ago, and we presented some information and had a good exchange of information with Trinity or Cause Development and Trinity Lutheran College. The screen that, or the map that's on the screen shows location, and I'll use my cursor to point out a few of the existing buildings and previous location. First of all, Trinity Lutheran College campus building is located on the southwest corner of California and Wetmore in what was formerly the Bon Marché building many, many years ago. It's been owned by Trinity Lutheran College for a number of years now and is the location of their main activities related to the college. Across the street is the parking garage. It used to be the Bon Marché parking garage, and now it's owned by Trinity Lutheran College. And it is, has in the neighborhood of about 400 to 500 parking stalls within that parking garage. The previous action was to allow for the development of student housing half a block to the east, or I guess 1 block depending upon how you measure, east of the parking garage for student housing for students who would be attending the college 2 blocks over to the west. The real estate transaction for this property fell through, and Trinity has located a new parcel, a vacant parcel of land on which they propose to develop with Cause Development instead of about 100 or so rooms at the previous location, a 56-room student dormitory housing that is located a little bit further from the parking garage than the previous location. Because our code requires that all residential development have its off-street parking provided on-site, this required a special ordinance that the City Council approved allowing for off-site parking for this residential use, and with the recognition previously that the parking garage provided a great resource that would not have of a big inventory of parking, that would not have the impacts from additional construction required for parking for a housing location this close to the parking garage in the college. The location to the north is a little bit further removed from the previous location. One thing that's not shown on this map is existing student housing that is located about, if the map were to extend to the west a little further, at the corner, northwest corner of Hoyt and Everett Avenue is the location of existing Trinity Lutheran College student housing, and students currently do walk from this location over to the campus here on Wetmore in California. And we can ask Trinity or Cause Development, who are in the audience tonight, if you have questions about numbers of students and how many use parking garage and so forth. The city did ask Trinity and Cause Development to prepare a parking management strategy that would address how the student residing in this building would, how their parking would be managed, and they provided a fairly detailed report through a parking and transportation consultant and Trinity's own parking management and housing management proposal, how this could work without creating an impact of students parking up in the neighborhood. And that information was discussed at the February 10th workshop and included in the packet of materials that you received tonight, or in your packet for tonight's meeting. And so with the requested change in location, it would require revision to the existing ordinance, which would be to, it's highlighted as Exhibit 1 to the resolution that I commented on a few minutes ago. One would be to change the location that's stated in Section 1B of the current ordinance, and also to do the same with regard to the Section 2, subsection 1, for the location, changing from the southwest corner of California and Oaks to the 2600 block of Rockefeller, and also changing the number of units within that student housing from approximately 100 to approximately 56 units. And those are really the only changes that are necessary to the ordinance in order for this location to be permitted for developing the student housing. So with that, I'll pause there. You do have the resolution in front of you. I believe that's all I have on the PowerPoint. And we do have folks from Co's Development and Trinity Lutheran College here tonight to address any questions and may want to add some comments about the proposal.
So, thank you. Does the Planning Commission have any questions right now? Commissioner Sand?
Yes, and my apologies, I wasn't at the workshop, so if these questions have been asked before, I apologize for bringing them up again. I had forgotten that we were actually talking about replacement of housing that's at the Hoyt and Everett Avenue site. That housing is going to go away, and this is essentially going to replace it?
The housing itself is not going to go away. It's just Trinity would prefer to, in this case, they are going to own this property and the housing. They currently are leasing the housing that the students live in the Hoyt location.
Oh, okay. I got the impression from the traffic report that it was actually replacing the housing that was at Hoyt and Everett, but that's not the case.
It's not, let me back up. It would be housing where students that may currently live in the Hoyt properties would move out of those properties into properties that the college owns. So by replacement, I guess we're not talking about replacing the building at Hoyt with something new. This is just housing that would be not additional student housing, I believe, and
The relocation.
TLC can, Trinity can address this better than I can, but I believe that they are going to just no longer use that Hoyt property. Okay. This property is actually a little bit closer for them than the existing leased housing.
And the character of the proposed location of the neighborhood is different than the original location, which is more kind of a commercial area?
That is correct, although it's still in the same zoning, the B3 zone. The boundary between the B3 zone and the residential zone is actually Rockefeller up in the 2600 block, whereas south of Everett Avenue, the B3 zone extends several blocks in the east and west direction. So it's on the edge of the B3 zone in the proposed location. On the east side of Rockefeller is a group of older homes in the Bayside neighborhood. That was the subject of a rezone request several years ago for Joe's Lab, and there had been, subsequent to that, a development approved by the city. The development, effective date of the development has expired on that property, but there was a proposal to redevelop that entire block face with higher density housing. It's an R4 zone that allows unlimited density on the east side of the street. And so the character of that neighborhood is a little different. In between, this property is located in between a current Frontier Communications utility structure to the north and a church to the south. A little bit different than some of the land uses that were at the previous location, where you had a little bit more contention for business parking. And the concern about relocating to this site was that it might impact residential uses who currently utilize some of the on-street parking on Rockefeller. And so that's the reason we asked for the parking study and parking management strategy.
And the last question I had was, on the prior site, did we have any available disabled parking on site at all?
On the previous location, it never got to a full-fledged development application, but and it was a complicated proposal because it was going to have housing that was built above some surface parking, both below the structure and adjacent to the structure, and there was, and still is on that site, disabled parking for the businesses that use that parking.
So on the proposed location, will there be any on-site parking at all, disabled or otherwise? And if not, can that be a condition that we could place on it?
I think what I would like to do is have COES respond to that, because we don't have a formal submittal yet for a building plan. They have developed some, at the pre-application level of detail, a plan for the site, but I'll ask them to address the parking question of what they proposed, and that is something we can talk about, certainly.
But it is possible that in our review, in our action, we could mention a desire to have some on-site disabled parking available for residents.
That's within the Planning Commission's purview, certainly is. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the commission? Yes.
Thank you. My concerns or my questions are about the restriction or the designation of parking spaces in the garage that will stay with these units as they're built, as their off-site parking resource. And if, from my memory, there's one space per unit that they must designate to be held for those people's vehicles. And that is in perpetuity for 56 spaces. If there are 56 rooms, will be designated and recorded with the city for those parking spots.
That is correct. That is correct. However, there is a provision in the ordinance that would allow for, after the project has been developed and we get some experience with the actual rate of vehicle ownership and utilization by the students within the building, if it results in much lower utilization within the parking structure, it would allow for that number to be adjusted based upon review by the city engineer and planning director to determine what an appropriate lower number may be. But it will have to be based on some observation and monitoring over a period of time.
Okay. Are there also provisions in the case that, 5 years out, there's been data collected and their numbers of spaces have been reduced, but then their population spikes again and they need all 56 spaces? Those will always be available to fulfill that need and can be adjusted upward as well as down?
The language in the current ordinance isn't that directive. It's anticipated that the actual utilization will be something much less than one parking space per unit within the building. And so we started with a conservative approach of requiring the one per unit, and after observing it for a period of time, at least for 1 year, that what that utilization is could be adjusted downward. It's not anticipated that it would be adjusted upward because really we don't believe, and I guess we could be surprised, but that we don't believe that it will ever go back up to the 1-to-1 ratio. But that's what we wanted to start with. That's the current zoning code standard for multifamily housing in this area.
Right. Taking the optimistic view and the what-if scenario, if the facility were at some point in the future shared by 3 institutions of higher learning, and some of these students might be from Everett Community College or WSU, my concern is that there be reserved and adequate parking, and if required at some point in the future, we could have all of those 56 spaces redesignated to service this particular building. So that's,
And in this case, I think, as with the previous question from Commissioner Sand, that would be within the purview of the commission. And the fortunate thing is that Trinity Lutheran College would own both properties and
Exactly.
certainly has the capacity to adjust what is reserved for students.
great, thank you.
Other questions from the commission? Okay. Would a representative from the applicant, Co's Development, want to speak before we open the public hearing?
Hi, thank you again for having us here tonight. Just a couple of things. First of all, I wanted to give you an update since we met a month ago. We have met with the neighborhood group, the Bayside Neighborhood Group, had a very short period of time on their agenda, actually the Tuesday following the last Planning Commission meeting. So, but received great feedback. And of course, what they were most interested in was the parking plan, and we walked through that plan with them as it related to not just Trinity Lutheran's plan to control parking within their students, but we also walked through our parking plan during the construction period, the fact that we were going to pay to acquire sites off the streets during the construction period, and the fact that we have entered into a letter of intent with the college next door, our neighbor, to reserve 2 spots in their parking spot for the students of that student housing facility in the event that they need to be loading or unloading groceries. So those types of circumstances. So we have reserved 2 spots in their parking lot for short-term needs, so that even on a temporary basis, we won't have students parking on the streets, with the intent, of course, to limit any impact to parking in the residential area. So that was received very well. Again, we had a very short period of time on their agenda, so we stayed after the meeting to try and engage as many of them as we could. And they were, I don't know if supportive, they weren't unsupportive. They really didn't, once the parking issue was addressed, at least at that meeting, they didn't seem to be bothered by the project at all. We did, of course, volunteer to attend as many future meetings as they would like us to attend, and we left that ball in their court. So that's that update. Commissioner Sand, as it relates to your parking on the site, we are not proposing parking on that site. It is a 6,000 square foot site, so very, very small, obviously. We do have the 2 spots in the parking lot next to our site that we have reserved with the church. But what we have done as it relates to really any disabilities, as you may or may not know, there is currently disabled parking in the parking garage itself. And as part of the project, have agreed to, I'm Alan, going to completely butcher this, upgrade the crosswalks from the parking garage to the facility such that they are ADA compliant. And if you look at where they are now, there's no parking on street. There's no disabled crosswalks that have been upgraded for any kind of disability. And so we believe actually this is a much better location and a much better solution as it relates to being able to serve the disabled students at the college.
Any follow-up questions? Thank you. All right, this is a public hearing on the change in location of the proposed student housing. So if anybody would like to speak about this item, now is your opportunity. Seeing none, do I hear a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Second.
Commissioner Tisdale,
Yes.
Commissioner Jordison,
Yes.
Commissioner Adams,
Yes.
Commissioner Sand,
Yes.
Commissioner Sosin,
Yes,
Chair Stewart.
Yes. And now I'd be happy to entertain a motion or if there's any questions or comments on the proposed resolution that would recommend that the city council approve a change in the location for the student housing authorized by the pilot project initially approved under ordinance number 3380-14. Commissioner Sand.
Alan, could you help me, if my fellow commissioners were to agree with me that there's a concern for the proximity of disabled parking now from the site to the garage, it's a different situation, I think, completely than the prior application. How would we put that type of requirement into this resolution?
Well, I can think of at least one way to address that. Perhaps there are others, and without trying to design the project from the table here, I think the concern would be to make sure that there is handicap accessible parking within proximity to the building. The city does allow that for on-street parking in proximity to a resident who may be disabled, and that might be one way of addressing it. However, not to say that there couldn't be other ways, and so perhaps through an arrangement that Trinity and Coes have with the abutting church, there may be some other opportunities. However, I think if we leave it to the applicant and the city to develop a solution that would meet the ADA requirements for the building, then we do have codes that speak to that. I'm not an expert on that. Those are managed by our building officials, so I don't know what those are, and I couldn't be more specific than that, or suggesting a condition that you might add.
My concern, quite frankly, is to have the parking on site. So there's assurance that it would be there and be available should they have a person of that kind of need in the facility, and not rely upon on-street parking or adjacent lot or something like that. I'm not sure what that means to their plans, if they have plans already. I don't know if they've submitted a site plan already, but my concern is to have that type of accommodation on the site, to have the assurance that it will be there throughout the use of the property.
What I can do, if obviously this is a concern, I think that we can do one of two things. We can either bring information back to the commission, or we can specify that handicap accessible, disabled accessible parking spaces shall be provided in accordance with city code. And again, I'm not an expert on what that means as to the location, number, and design of such spaces, but we can just make sure that that is incorporated into any conditions that would be passed along to the city council in the amended ordinance.
Well, I guess the first question is whether or not there's a common concern on the council, on the commission here or not, or it's just me, so.
I think there's wisdom in trying to plan for that eventuality, particularly if Trinity Lutheran already has some students that are ADA have those needs. So, but I was going to ask Commissioner Sand from my understanding, the entire 6,000 square foot pad is going to be built out. And correct me if I'm wrong. So there's no surface space available on that lot the way it's been designed for any parking at all. But would you be okay with having one spot designated in the lot, the parking lot to its south, which is where the church parking is going to be dedicated for loading and unloading, and I think 2 parking spaces available on Saturday or one of the weekend days, I can't remember when. Or maybe it's not available on Sunday when they need it for church parking, but would be the rest of the week. Is that close enough if it was immediately on the street in front or adjacent to the door on that south lot?
I don't think so. I don't think it's the same. Because you're talking about the parking stalls being available most of the time, other than Sundays when church services are going on. The student's going to live in that housing, be there, and have a need for the use of it. I don't know if the building is being designed the same way the other one was, where it'll be kind of up in the air a little bit, so it'll be parking, or could be parking below. I don't know. So.
And if this is a condition that does get passed along, it may require some redesign of the building to accommodate that, but that's something that, again, is within the purview of the Planning Commission and City Council.
Alan, can you teach me on the street handicap parking? I've seen it down that end of town. Is that what you're talking about? I apply for a permit, and then the signs go up, and the parking that would be on Rockefeller would then be designated with a sign? Is that?
It would be designated for disabled parking. It wouldn't be necessarily reserved for a specific individual, but the Traffic Engineering Division does work with home or residents of neighborhoods where there is a need, and will provide a disabled parking stall reserved for disabled individuals in front of an individual's house, and that oftentimes, I think, is used exclusively by that resident, but I don't think that it can be reserved specifically for one individual if it's on the street. Anybody who qualified for the disability could use it.
I wonder if the church has excuse me, designated handicap parking, and where that would be in proximity to the proposed student housing, and if they could somehow share that space, potentially, except for the Sunday.
Yeah, again, my concern is sharing is different than having something that's dedicated and available all the time. So.
So, I think we've closed our public hearing.
I'm the trustee chairman for the church.
Okay.
I can talk about our parking lot. Our parking lot is in use 7 days a week. We have all kinds of 12-step meetings, other types of meetings that go on in the church, and we have agreed to allow Trinity to have 2 spaces reserved for loading and unloading only short time, but the rest of the spots we need.
Okay.
We cannot afford to give up any more spots because we have 3 handicap spots in our lot and have more than 3 handicap members in our church. We have a lot of older people in our church.
Thank you very much. Would you mind saying your name for the record?
Charles Hershiser, Hershiser.
Okay. Thank you. Yes.
I'll do what I do best, and that's be blunt. It just seems like on-site parking on this site could possibly be a deal breaker, just because it's so small, and I feel that there is a reasonable solution to this, but to insist that there be on-site parking for this size lot, for this density, and we're kind of starting to look at getting relief from parking requirements as the driver for development. I would suggest that if, certainly it's not going to preclude a disabled person from living there, and if reasonable accommodations are made for anybody who happens to be a resident in that building, it would seem that there might be some sort of, solution that would be a reasonable alternative to having on-site parking, or parking, and maybe, if there is a disabled parking spot on the street, that could, with a sufficient ramp, sufficient access to the building. I would hate to see that become the obstacle for this project moving forward, because I've always been sort of a enthusiastic proponent of this project, and I would hate to see it, I would hate to see that become sort of the fly in the ointment that stops the project from moving forward. So that's just a comment that I have. I'm certainly not arguing that we don't need a reasonable accommodation for disabled people, for folks to live there. However, it's such a small site, and it would be so hard to get a curb cut and a parking stall, disabled parking stall into that. Just the logistics of it seem somewhat unreasonable, but that's just a comment that I have.
What about the Frontier site? Is there any, the one that's on the north side?
I think we should ask Coase or Trinity to address, I guess, some of these questions or concerns. I would recommend that you allow them to come up and talk about these responses.
Okay. The commission has questions for the applicant, so if you wouldn't mind. Thank you.
Thank you. The Verizon building is pretty much lot line to lot line. There's very little space on that lot that would allow for parking. And Commissioner Jordanson, I appreciate your comments. To try and put parking on a lot that size would be cost prohibitive for this project. If for no other reason, we would be building really a parking slab, which is very, very expensive for what is really, for all intents and purposes, a very, very small building. So I think, I haven't obviously run the numbers, but intuitively, it would make it very financially difficult for this transaction to move forward.
Other comments or questions?
I didn't see in the traffic study where they really addressed handicapped and how many there might be or were, or I guess I would ask of the handicap stalls that are in the parking garage, are they occupied by students, or are they occupied by other folks that use that parking lot? I'm just trying to get an idea of how many handicap students.
Yes, currently we don't have anybody in our student body right now that is considered handicapped, and I don't know what the count is in the garage, so those would be utilized by the public at this point. But again, I don't know the volume nor the duration of them being used.
Thank you.
Okay.
Commissioner Sand?
I think the idea of the concept of the student housing is very important for the community. I think the idea of having Trinity Lutheran in our community is very important. And I think the relationship between the college and the city is one that we want to protect and find ways to promote as long as we can. I mean, it should be long-term. It's really beneficial to the community. I supported the concept of the prior application. I thought it made some sense. The proximity to the garage and the college campus made sense. The parking potential made sense. It just appears to me that the proposal now is not equivalent to the prior application. And if the site is that tight, such that the building is corner to corner to corner to corner, it could be it's just the wrong site.
If I may suggest, if the commission would like additional information, I can bring that back at a future meeting and get you some more information about what the code actually does require. Again, we don't manage that in the planning department. That's in another department, and so I'm not expert in that subject. We can bring back what the building code and building official would require under the state requirements.
Commissioner Sand?
If we were to table the item, when would it come back?
We could bring it back as early as next week. It's a short agenda, and if we just continue the public hearing for 1 week, we could come back with information in response to the discussion tonight.
Yes, Commissioner Adams?
I agree with Commissioner Sand's comments in terms of the importance and the question with regard to disabled parking, so I want to support it, and I think it is something I'd like to hear more about. The other thing I'd like to hear more about next week, if it does come back, is Commissioner Sosin's comments with regard to the strength of the 56 parking stalls in the parking lot. I want to make sure that we revisit that issue also, because the language in there says the city may reduce it, and the concern I have is at some point, maybe this building isn't used for student housing, or maybe we do need the 56 stalls. And given the location of this new site versus the old site, I agree with Commissioner Sand's comments. I don't feel like this is an apples for apples conversation in terms of what the community is getting, although I agree completely also with the importance of this college to this community, and I want to support it, and I want to find ways to get it done. But I have the same concerns, and I struggle with these issues on what we should be doing as a citizen panel in terms of making recommendations, because I don't want to kill the project, but I do want to make sure the community is protected and we find a balance here.
Yes, Commissioner Sosin?
If we are entertaining tabling this for a week, if we could find out from traffic engineering how we could use an on-street spot that is permitted to, if there's a way to permit it to Trinity, so that if they needed that, it's as good as on-site, but it might be right out in front of the building on the street and reserved for their student body. If we could do that, that would be maybe a solution. And to my earlier comments, looking at our resolution, if we just added a couple of words, I would leave it to you and your crafty department to figure out how to make it read right. But where we talk about the strategy to adjust parking over time, I've just lost it. Hold on one moment, please. Where we say that we would reduce, we may, as the city may reduce parking, if we could just put reduce or increase, and there's another paragraph that, or another sentence that follows that, a couple, here it is, never mind. Page 2, number 6, about halfway through that paragraph. If utilization is consistently lower or higher, which is what I would add, over a period of time approved by the city's traffic engineer than required in the section, the city may reduce or increase, that would be another add, required amount of off-street parking required in the TLC garage, blah, blah, blah. So that way, we could adjust both ways if we needed to.
That's, again, certainly within your purview, and we have the luxury of Trinity owning both properties and having the capacity to adjust as necessary.
Yeah, I think that would be great. Thanks.
Other commission comments?
How many handicap units would be in this building? Thank you.
So there does seem interest from the public also to make some additional comments on this, but we have closed tonight's public hearing on that. So do I hear a motion from the commission to continue this hearing to next Tuesday, March 17th?
So move.
I would second.
Commissioner Tisdale?
Yes.
Commissioner Jordison?
Yes.
Commissioner Adams?
Yes.
Commissioner Sand?
Yes.
Commissioner Sosin? Chair Stewart?
Yes.
Thank you. We'll get as much information as we can about those questions, and if we can provide that to you prior to the meeting, we will do so. If not, at least by next week's continued hearing date.
Okay, thank you. So we'll now move to our third item, which is a public workshop on a proposed code amendment that would allow for consideration of a special property use permit for a public agency to establish a transportation maintenance facility in the B2 Community Business Zone. And do we have some comments from staff on your?
Yes, Alan Giffen, Planning Director. This is also a code amendment that was requested by State Department of Transportation, and the Planning Commission did agree to initiate consideration of the code amendment. Under our current land use code, we do not allow for, under the term public service buildings and uses, we do not allow uses that would include things like outdoor storage of equipment or heavy equipment maintenance facilities. In And so in order for the State Department of Transportation to utilize the property that they own in the Eastmont Park and Ride area just off of the interchange at 526, 527, and I-5, a code amendment is necessary to allow for that type of a use within a B2 zone. What we have recommended in our discussion with the Department of Transportation that would be added as a special regulation in the B2 zone only, and that it would be subject to further review through a special property use permit process by the hearing examiner with public notification of property owners within 500 feet and the ability to add conditions as necessary to mitigate impacts related to, well, just any type of impact that could impact surrounding properties. And we do have within the staff memo an excerpt from our code that includes a lot of the evaluation, all of the evaluation criteria that would be used to evaluate any proposal. So it deals with such things as aesthetics, noise, hours of operation, lighting, glare, variety of different types of impacts that may be irritants or nuisance for neighborhood if not properly designed, sited, and mitigated, screened, and so forth. And so rather than this being a proposal that the Planning Commission has the authority to review for site-specific issues as we seem to have been in the last item, this is really something that if the code amendment is approved, it would be given to the hearing examiner the responsibility of reviewing any application for a maintenance facility, outdoor storage activities. And so primarily what the DOT would like to use it for is an equipment building that they would store equipment in, and probably some type of a covered structure, not totally enclosed or perhaps partially enclosed, for sand and so forth that they used during winter storm events. This location is very well located for the needs of the DOT. Currently, they store sand in public right-of-way, kind of off the edge of the road 5 as Everett Mall Way goes north of the mall toward the interchange off on a shoulder, and it's a difficult maneuver for them to get in and out of. This would be something that is more of a well-controlled, traffic-controlled location, and still has enough property around it that they feel that they can mitigate impacts for any future use through the special property use permit process. And so this is just a workshop tonight. It's something where we've identified in the memo the proposed language that would allow for this type of use to be considered subject to the special property use permit. I would also like to point out that we would amend the definition of public service use and building, which would provide some exception that I mentioned earlier that currently excludes equipment storage yards. And that would only be, again, in this B2 zone with the addition of a special regulation to our use table within that one cell on a chart that applies strictly to this use in this zone, the B2 zone. We do have very little B2 zoning in the community. We used to have a lot more of it before we created new zones for the Broadway mixed-use zone. About half of the Broadway corridor used to be Zone B2, and also the Evergreen Way corridor, about half of that corridor used to be Zone B2. I will show you the location of the Eastmont property, which is what the area that they're talking about is located in between El Capitan Way right here. This is a park and ride facility that is used by community transit and carpoolers, where the residential property, nearest residential properties are located probably a couple hundred feet to the east of this portion of their property. This property, well, I won't go into all of the site characteristics, but this is the location they've indicated they want to use. Property is located right in this spot here on this zoning map. And the red property that you see on the map here is B2 zoning. It includes the grocery store, the name escaping me now, just at 100th Street, south of the skate deck. Hey, Winco, thank you. And a little bit further south, Costco is in the same zoning. The B2 zoning that you see on the map is in red here. We also have some areas in the same color that are B2B zoning that is an office zone, and the proposal would not include the B2B zone. So a lot of the property on the east side of 19th Avenue, for example, is office zoning and not subject to this request. Other locations of B2 zoning, we have some just north of Everett Avenue. In fact, this is the location we were just talking about for the Trinity Lutheran College proposal right here. We have B2 zoning on the north side of Everett Avenue between Rockefeller and Broadway, and a little bit more further to the east around the intersection of Walnut and Everett Avenue on all four quadrants. This is the 41st Street Safeway right here that's got a contract rezone that deals specifically with Safeway. Some additional B2 zoning where the McDonald's and Ivers and that general vicinity are. On Evergreen Way, the Claremont Shopping Center where the QFC is located is also B2 zoning. There's surprisingly a lot more B2 zoning in Lowell than you would think by driving through the neighborhood, but it's in the vicinity of Main Street in Lowell and 3rd Avenue where there are some commercial uses, a lot more commercial zoning than commercial uses in this location. Then also at the 41st Street View Ridge neighborhood, the All Saviors Lutheran Church is Zone B2 in the View Ridge Shopping Center, and a small commercial complex on the southwest corner of Mukilteo Boulevard and Dogwood. That's some B2 zoning. And a couple more areas. Again, this is the Costco area, the shopping center down here where there's a Bartell Drugs, and the Safeway property across the street, and the property that we recently, about a year or so, dealt with the Taylor development proposal that's now under construction with the townhouses by Polygon. And a little further south, coming around the lake, some B2 zoning where we have a small shopping center, some B2B zoning which would not be subject to this code amendment. This is the Emery's Restaurant, no change likely to occur there. Even if it were owned by a public agency, I don't think that's likely to happen there. So that's really all the B2 zoning that we have remaining in the city. And so if this code amendment were to be approved. Other potential public agencies who had an interest in acquiring property could possibly pursue such a use through a special property use permit process. However, most of this property in the city is developed and used for commercial purposes. So with that, I'll stop talking there, see if you have any further questions. This is a public workshop. We'd encourage you to take public comments tonight and give us any feedback that you have for a future public hearing decision meeting.
Commissioners? Yes.
I guess if it's a special use permit required to get this type of, special use, that process would, you showed us all these other B2 zones and areas that are zone B2. So you kind of, if you have this type of special use permit at that Eastmont site, then you sort of open the door in these other areas that are zone B2. However, if it was real problematic with the neighborhood or something, it was unlikely to come about that you would have something like a maintenance facility right next to a, looked like we were looking at stuff that's all the way almost to downtown and as far south as like almost to Silver Lake, but unlikely. It does, and this wouldn't go through the hearing examiner, correct? It would just go through our planning department?
No, the special property use permit does go through the hearing examiner. So it's a little bit more rigorous process in that there's wider notification than an administrative review. There's a public hearing. There are findings that have to be made. The use could be denied if it was something that would be too impactful, and certainly that's one of the reasons for the public notification and the public hearing is to learn what neighbors feel about a proposed land use and their concerns, and those are addressed through that process.
Other comments? Commissioner Sand?
Seems to me that the department has a facility on Broadway, the north end of Broadway, a maintenance operation that they've got equipment there and may have materials there. Is that the same type of operation they propose for this site as well?
It is, similar to some of the use that they make of the facility up on North Broadway by the community college. And so this is a location that gives them much quicker access during storm events, snow events to state highway facilities in the south end.
But it's not to replace the North Broadway facility?
No, it's not a replacement. We have had some communications with DOT and Washington State University about, potential changes in ownership there. That's a long ways off, and if it's going to happen at all, there'd have to be a probably much larger replacement facility for that North Broadway property than this site would afford.
North Broadway property has what kind of zoning on it?
It used to be B2 zoning, but now it's Broadway mixed-use zoning.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
I guess I'd like to comment that I think that the proposed footnote to the zoning code number 71 is quite specific and restrictive in terms of what would be allowed. And then the evaluation criteria, there's 11 of them that are in the staff report on page 2 that would have to be addressed by the hearing examiner with public notice for the surrounding property owners. So I'm finding that to very much restrict this use. So if anybody in the public would like to make a comment on this proposal, staff will go back and prepare a resolution for us at a future public hearing, but this is a chance to inform us. Thank you, and your name and address.
Everly, 312 Pex Drive.
Thank you.
It kind of coincidental that I came to this meeting tonight because a number of years ago, when the carpool lanes were added from Everett Mall way on down to the downtown portion, at that time, the company I worked for actually had a contract to build a post-frame structure for sand storage on this area location. It did not happen because one element of the State Department of Transportation was not in communication with the other part, and the people that were going to be remodeling highway already had that spot designated as equipment storage during the construction phase. So we ended up storing all the materials at the North Broadway site. And the building was eventually built out by the fairgrounds at Monroe. So I just bring that a little bit historical bit of information. An attempt had been made previously to build on that site, and I don't think it ever got to the permit phase because by the time we got the drawings and engineering done, they discovered that among themselves they couldn't build there. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Good evening, Madam Chair. This is Victor Harris, 3017 Lombard Avenue in Everett. I think I share Commissioner Jordansen's concern about opening the door for the whole B2 zone. I'm wondering if it's possible to create a new zone or label this as a SPU alone and keep the two distinctions separate. I'm not sure I really want to see a whole bunch of maintenance facilities in and around downtown. I think that's kind of detracting from the goals that we have set for this community. Thank you.
Yes, response.
Alan Giffen, planning staff. In response to Mr. Harris's concern about the downtown, one of the criteria that is used would be the consistency with the goals and policies of the Everett General Plan or the Comprehensive Plan for the area and the land use designation in which a property is located. And so within the downtown area, obviously, we have a lot more policies that suggest other types of uses and development, and we'll actually even be doing additional work when we get done with our comprehensive plan update to update a larger downtown area type of sub-area plan and be even more specific. These types of uses would not be encouraged within a downtown environment, and so that's one of the criteria that can be used to either deny a proposal should somebody actually want to pursue one in the downtown, or to address some type of mitigation to make things more compatible if the site would lend itself to such a treatment.
Okay. Any other comments?
You know, it appears to me when we look at all these maps that this is probably the only location where this makes sense. And if there's a way to tighten this down a little bit, that it'd have to be a property that's in B2 zone and it has near proximity or adjacent proximity to the transportation system that would be served by this facility or something like that, I would think it'd be a way to go, but I just can't see that type of proposal in any other B2 zone that's on any of those other maps,
Yeah,
any other property.
I would agree with you, and I think we can tailor this so that it is a lot more narrowly written and would not open up as much of the B2 zone for this type of potentially incompatible use in other locations.
Yeah, I mean, likewise, I wouldn't want to see the Public Utilities District or the City of Everett have a facility like this in any of these other B2 zones.
Right.
That might open up, so.
We can bring something back that's a little more tailored to, without writing it a special regulation for one property, we can put some criterion that would eliminate a lot of other potential properties.
Thank you.
Commissioner Sosin?
I echo Commissioner Sand's concerns and also Victor Harris's. My take on the B2 zone is that it's really intended to foster community business.
Correct.
And I agree completely that that site may work because of its proximity to I-5, but I think that the way things are currently zoned, even the B2 zone that's on the quadrant of Walnut and I-5 is, could be cherry-picked before we did anything to change our downtown outline. So my question is, without doing anything to include this kind of use in the B2 zone, is there a way to cite I may not remember the term, but a hard-to-cite facility or an essential facility that goes through a hearing examiner process completely separate of opening up the B2 zoning?
No,
Okay.
not in our current code. That's why we have brought the amendment forward.
Okay. All right, then, if we can perhaps add a critical distance from I-5 interchanges, but not include any of the area of our downtown core. It'd be interesting to see these red zones, say with a restriction of a half-a-mile radius from I-5. I'm just throwing that out there as an idea, and see how limiting that gets on our maps.
We can come back with some different criteria that might be more appropriate to limit the potential impacts that a facility like this could cause in other B2 zones.
That'd be great. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
With that, I think we have what we need unless you have any further comments on that item.
I think we're good. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
So we're adjourned?
Okay, so this is coming back next.